All right, so everyone, please join us on the the week one documentation. So the first bit is the same as with what we covered during the introduction of Computer Science Club. So we'll just get past that. I'm gonna be honest, it's just copy and pasted. Um, but we'll jump straight into Python, I guess. So this year we'll be covering the Python programming language. Um, Anyone who hasn't worked with Python, I guess I'll make a poll in the chat. I'm wondering if anyone has experience working with Python. So I posted a poll in the chat in the junior chat. If the poll bot can work. Um, doesn't appear to be working. Okay, let's just skip past that. Guess it doesn't want to work. But if anyone has an experience with Python, we'll be starting from the ground up again. Sorry about that. We'll start off at the same place, I guess. Um, yeah. Uh, you can make a poll and we can react to. We want to keep everything in the same place, so we want to put all the polls uh in this in the polls channel. So I'll try again. You ever worked? Have you ever tried Python in the past? All right. So if anyone has worked with Python before, feel free to react. And if not, uh, react with a thumbs down. And if you're not sure, you can also react with a shrugging emoji. All right. So I guess it's about an even split. Some of us have worked with Python, some of us have. For those who have worked with Python, we will be covering from the basics again. So sorry about that. And for those who haven't, don't worry, we will teach you. If you have any questions about Python, feel free to ask. Any of the teachers know all the teachers know Python, so we feel free to ask. Um, and yeah, now we won't be focusing on the same stuff as with the computer science courses here at Massey. Computer science courses mainly focus more on programming rather than computer science itself. Um, Especially in ICS3U, they cover something called Pygame, which is some graphics library for Python. Here we will not cover Pygame at all. We'll be just focusing on Python itself. All right. So to get started with Python, for those who don't have Python installed yet, I posted in the resources chat last week. Shame on you. But for those who haven't installed Python yet, who are using Windows or Mac OS, please head over to the python.org/downloads, um, link, and click on download Python 3.9.7, and that should download your computer. For those of you using Linux, please directly message me. Um, it all depends on your cases. If you're using Linux, just directly message me. I can get you started on using Python. Now, someone's asked, broke people be I not necessarily. I personally use Linux to program. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're broke. However, I personally use Linux. However, okay, moving on. Can we use Replit? Yes, you can use Replit. Replit it's a really nice IDE. It's a really nice online editor that you can use. It's in the resources under the senior section. But I encourage you guys to use it as well. It's replit.com, and let me show you guys it. Replit.com. All right. And it's this really nice uh online editor that you can pretty much code on without having to download anything. You can code anywhere, and it saves on the cloud. So you can go to replit.com, sign up for an account, and then you click create. So you can create plus, and then you use Python. You select Python. Start coding in Python. All right. Now downloading Python comes with two items: a Python editor and an interpreter. So I'll explain to you what those mean. So the Python editor, it's called idle. and it's what you use to write in Python. Um, Technically, you don't have to use idle. You could even use Notepad. Like you can use anything to code in to write your Python code. But and once you start like creating large projects, I discourage sticking with idle. Since if you're working with multiple files, it just gets complicated. And you should be looking at other editors. However, if you're starting off and just doing like single files, um, idle is a good place to start. Especially with competitive programming. Competitive programming, you're only working with one file. So I highly encourage just sticking with idle for now. Um, next thing is the Python interpreter. So the interpreter is what allows you to run your code. So computers, they can't naturally understand what Python code. They need something to translate it, and that's where the interpreter comes in. It takes your code and then translate it line by line while you're running it. This is different from languages like C++, which is being taught in the senior class. They use something called a compiler. So a compiler, what it does is, let's say you have like let's say you have something written in French or whatever. What the compiler does is, okay, it looks through your this whole thing in French and translates it all at once, and then it's like, okay, here's the finished English copy, I guess. While the interpreter, it pretty much it just translates it in like line by line while you're reading it. So that's what the difference between compiler and interpreter, and that's what Python uses. It uses an interpreter, which translates it line by line. Someone has something in junior help. So someone's asking me which one. So I want you to be opening idle, mainly. When you do large projects, what other editors would be used instead of idle? So as Kevin mentioned, PyCharm. PyCharm is a language you can editor you use. You can use VS Code. It's not fully featured. Like it's classified as an editor, not an IDE. And IDE has a bit more. VS Code. I personally use VS Code. I've also used PyCharm. But those are some of the examples. I'm not really sure what other. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But those are some of the editors that you could use instead of idle. I don't recommend as a beginner using PyCharm or VS Code, mainly because they include autofilling features, and if you're a beginner, autofill doesn't really help you learn learn your code, I guess. So I do recommend just sticking with idle for now as a beginner. All right. Anyone? I started with VS Code. It's perfectly fine. Don't worry about it. If you started with VS Code, that's fine. So yeah. So if you don't want to install Python on your computer, you can always just use an online editor. The favorite amongst Xcode starter noises. Yeah. That's a favorite amongst the teachers is Replit for online editor. So that's mentioned earlier, replit.com. You can feel free to use it. You can also use other editors online if there's available. One problem with online editors, we'll cover this later, is with competitive programming, especially the CCC and our contest, you'll need to download your Python files, which ends with type or type directly. Okay, into Dmosh you can type directly into Dmosh. However, for our contests and the CCC, you'll need to upload your own files. So there's that. All right. No one seems to have any more questions, so let's jump straight. Continue on. So we'll start with basic Python syntax. So before we begin, open up idle or create a REPL in Replit by selecting Python under create. We won't be creating a file just yet. We'll be working in the shell in idle or console in Replit. So let me open up idle. So I also have a bunch of idle Python versions. So I'll be working in 3.9 since that is the version we're working on. And you should it should pop up this shell, I guess. This window with uh with for Python. All right. So everyone should have something window like this. If anyone doesn't, then feel free to type in that in the chat. No, I guess. All right. Okay, so just like math and a calculator, Python has operations it can do. Like the main operations we'll be focusing on are addition, subtraction, multiplication, exponent, division, integer division, and modulo. Well, modulus. Addition, subtraction, and multiplication exponents do what you expect them to do, just like in math. Division is where things get a bit different in this when we start to introduce two different types of numbers in Python: integers and floating point numbers, simply known as floats. Modulo is also something new that you might have also not heard of, unless you're in my grade 12 math class, in which we covered a bit of modulo. Uh, but I'm guessing most of you guys are not in my grade 12 math class, so there's that. But we'll cover all of that. So if you haven't learned this in math or just forget, because we all forget, an integer is any number. So it could be positive, negative, or 0, but it doesn't include a decimal or a fraction. So examples would include like 1, 0, 101, 25, negative 60, 98, 97, etc. A float, on the other hand, is any number that includes a decimal. So examples include 3.14, 3.001, negative 6.2, 5.0, 2.123, 123, etc. This is considered a float, even though it ends with .0.0. It's still considered a float because it has that decimal. Just to clarify with everyone. All right. So now that we have that confusion has cleared up, division is essentially the same as division in math. You will end up with a float. So let's say like we have 4 divided by 2. That would end with 2.0 in Python. But if you did integer division, on the other hand, as the name implies, will result in integer. So 4 integer division divided by 2 would give you 2. No decimals. With the modulo operation, it gives you a remainder of the division operation. So negative numbers will act differently as well. So and negative numbers is when things get really complicated as well. In terms of division, integer division, it will always give you the floor of the result. So the floor is pretty much the next lowest number. So with like, let's say we have a number 5.5. The floor of 5.5 would be 5. All right? But in that result, negative 5.5 becomes negative 6, since that's the next lowest number. All right? In terms of modulo, you will get a number between 0 and your dividend. So does anyone know what a dividend is? Does anyone remember what dividend? So you have your divisor, dividend, and your quotient. So quotient is the result.
Isn't your dividend like the number you're like the number you want to divide?
Yeah. It's what number you want to divide. Like, so you have the number you want to divide from and the number you're dividing with. So in terms of modulo, you will get a number between 0 and your dividend in such a way that it satisfies satisfies these equations and satisfies this, I guess. So the modulo symbol is this percent sign. So P modulo Q will result in R, which is your remainder, right? And this is what you also learn in grade 11 functions class. So anyone who has taken a grade 11 functions class, you will know this. Anyone who hasn't, I don't really expect many of you guys to take having a grade 11 functions class at this moment. But so your divisor, so what you're dividing from, is equal to your quotient times your dividend plus R, plus your remainder. So pretty much, let's say we have 5 divided by 4, right? We have 5 divided by 4. So, if we did 5 divided by 4, that would result in like a remainder of a result in 1.25. But if we just want integers, it just result in 1. and then that would, 5 divided by 4 would result in 1 with a remainder of 1, right? So that's where this comes in. So it's 1 times 4 plus 1, that gives you 5. All right, and the remainder has to be 0. Has to be greater or equal to 0, but it has to be less than or equal to your quotient. No, wait, it should be less than quotient. That is wrong. I should fix that, but moving on. So example usage of these operations. So 1 plus 5. You can type this in your idle shell. So let's say 1 plus 5. 1 plus 5. That should give you 6. And then -2 times -1, that gives you -3.5. And 10 times -2, that gives you -20. And then 2 to the exponent 3, that gives you 8. And then 5 divided by 4, it does normal division, which gives you 1.25. And then 4 divided by 4, it gives you a float of 1.0. And then 5 integer division, 4, would give you 1, since it gives you the 4. And then 5 mod 4 would give you 1, since that's a remainder, I guess. And then -5 mod 4 would give you 3, since the next lowest number would be 2, so it'd be -2 times 4. And since the number r has to be greater or equal to 0, but less than 4, it makes sense to put the next number would be 3. It's not -1, because -1 is less than 0. Well, less than it has to be. It just has to be between 0 and your quotient, I guess. So with 5 mod -4, that should be -3. This is still wrong. It should be 0, but it should just be 0, but it's between 0 and your quotient, I guess. And then -5 integer division 4 should give you -2. All right. And same thing with math. Order of operations still apply. You can still put brackets around your operation. So in this case, 3 plus 4 times 5. That gives you 23. But if you put 3 plus 4 times 5, that gives you 35. All right. Anyone have any questions about that? Feel free to stop me if anything is confusing, I guess.
So how does integer division work again?
So integer division works. It's like normal division. So you know how division works, right?
Yeah.
But you usually result in like some like decimal or fraction. What integer division does, so with like positive numbers, it just takes you just remove the decimal. However, with
Oh,
like negative numbers, so how the integer division actually works, it does a flooring operation. Do you know what a flooring operation is? The operator is?
no.
Okay, so what it pretty much does, it pretty much takes the next lowest number. All right. So if you have 5.5, what's the next lowest number, like as an integer?
5,
All right. Then what is -5.5 then?
6,
-6. So
or
yeah,
-6.
yeah. So that's how it works. All right.
Okay.
Do you understand that?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any other questions before we continue? Going once, going twice. All right. Okay. So Python, beyond just numbers, you can also store these items called strings, right? There is a bit of, if we were in person, there's this funny thing on the wall in Mackenzie's room that I would have shown you guys about like strings, and what it pretty much is, it's just a bunch of like letters held on a string, and that's why we call it strings. Funny joke. But we're online, so I can't really show you guys that. But what strings are is it's pretty much any assortment of characters surrounded by quotation marks. It doesn't matter which quotation mark you use. You can use single quotes, or you can use double quotes. So they can either be on a single line, denoted by a single quote, or multiple lines, which is just usually using 3 quotes. So in this example, so like this is a single line, string. But if I use like an apostrophe, this is also a single line string. All right, and then you can use multiple lines. In which you put 3 and you type in this is multi-line string. All right. Oh, whoops! I forgot to put three three quotes, and that should result in this is a multi-line string. But it gives you this weird character. I'll teach you that later. That just pretty much means like there's supposed to be like a next line there. All right. It doesn't matter what you include in a string. You can include whatever you want. You can include numbers, letters, characters, you name it. You can probably put it in the string. So you can also do something called string concatenation, where you can add 2 or more strings together. You can also multiply strings to repeat it a certain number of times like this. So with string concatenation, you can combine 2 or more strings together. So like, let's say I want to make the word computer science, but I have one string computer science and another string club. So I can take computer science and I can add club to it and merge it together, computer science club. And you can also multiply strings together, and it will repeat it a certain number of times. So let's say I have VMCS and I want to repeat that 3 times. It will now print VMCS 3 times. All right. And then with strings, you can also get portions or single characters out of them. So this is similar to a property called list. We'll cover lists in a bit, but you can call this thing called the index operator. This operator uses square brackets after your string, and they have integers separated by colons, and you can do the following. So if you can only include one integer, it will just get that one character at that index you provided. All right. If you provide 2 integers, the first integer is where you start counting. So let's say you want to take after the first character, and then the second integer is where you stop at. But it takes up to, but it doesn't include that character. So let's say I'm taking the first character and I'm going up to, but not including the second character. That would just only include one character in that case, but you get the point. And if you're specifying 3 integers, it does the same. The first 2 integers are exactly the same, but the third integer, it steps by third integer. So let's say we include the first integer. You start at the first integer, and you go to the very end, and then you say that the last integer is 2. So it takes every other character. If you specify 3, it takes every third character, and if you say 4, it takes every fourth character, and so on and so forth. You can also not include integers except for the case of the one integer, since you have that just doesn't really make much sense. In which it just defaults. The first integer defaults to the beginning, so the very beginning of the string. The second integer defaults to the very end of your string, and the third integer defaults to 1, and it always steps by 1. So keep in mind as well, computers start counting from 0 instead of 1. So the very first character of your string would be 0. So let's say we have VMCS, all right? And we call the 0 index. What do you guys think will be taken if I call 0? You can also type in.
V?
I'm sorry?
The V?
Yeah, it will take the V. All right. And like in this example, if I type test case, test string, I meant, and I take 5, it takes the S, since that's the 5th character starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. And now let's say I want to take, a portion of this text. Let's say with VMCS, all right. Oh, whoops. With VMCS, let's say I put VMCS club, and I want to take only the club portion. All right. So let's say I want to take from 4 till the very end. All right. So it defaults to the end. If I type that in, it takes out club. Now I include the space in here by accident, but you get the point. All right. And if I do the exact same, so let's say I do VMCS club, but then I start without anything in the beginning, and I end with 4, it just takes VMCS. All right. And then now with let's say VMCS club, but I want every other letter. I can just omit the first 2, and then I can say I'm stepping by 2, and it takes every other letter. All right. Anyone have any questions about that?
Can you start from like a specific letter? So for example, if you have VMCS Club, can you take everything after the C, but like only the C?
Everything after the C, but only the C?
I mean, like, can you specify to take everything after the C instead of like instead of the number 4?
Uh, so I'm not sure what you mean. Like, so like in this case, like VMCS club, like can I specify like the S and then club? Is that
Yeah, basically. Like, can you
so,
specify a letter to say it after?
um you can in which you just call the index of you find where the C is and then you just pretty much call where it is. So in this case it'll be like VMCS club, right? And then so this is the zeros character first, second. So we start from the third character onwards. So 3 onwards, and that'd be S club. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess.
You can also find there's a way to find where the C is in here. If that was also part of your question, we'll cover
Yeah.
that in another time. But you can, you can, but we'll just cover how to find where these letters are. All right. Anyone else have any other questions? No? All right. You can also specify negative numbers in here. Rather than counting from left to right, it will start counting from right to left if you include the negative numbers. So let's say we have like VMCS club, but I want the very last character. So I can just specify -1, and it gets the very last character, which is B. All right. And then say VMCS club, and I want everything from the beginning all the way to the second last character. It'll just go VMCS cl. It doesn't include the UB. Um, and there's the same principle. It still counts. It still steps by 1 by default. So if I say like -1 to -3, it gives something blank. But I'd have to specify I want to start counting backwards. So -1, -3, and then -1, and it starts writing out my writing out um, uh, the end of club backwards. All right. Um, anyone have questions about that as well? All right. Guessing no one has any other questions about that. Feel free to ask me as well after someone has posted in Junior Help. Could you go over again how to figure out what the letter is? Um, what do you mean by that? Like we will cover how to find where the letters are in the string. That is for another time. However, if you want to go, how do I make the text in? Is this too small for you guys? I should ask that. How do I make the font bigger? Do you guys want me to make this make my idle a bit bigger?
Yeah.
All right, I'll make it bigger for you guys. Is this good for you guys? Let me just make this a bit smaller for
Yeah.
myself. All right. Oh no, how I want to see if I can do it on my own computer. So on your own computer, you just click Options and you click Configure Idle, and then you change your size here. You can even change your font to Comic Sans if you guys want. But you know. Could you go over negative numbers again? Sure, I can go over negative numbers. So how negative numbers work is that rather than counting from left to right, from 0 to whatever the end of your string is, negative numbers pretty much now start backwards. So rather than like, so this would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you want to go negative numbers, pretty much just goes backwards. So this would be -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7, -8, -9. All right. And from there, you can now just call in -1, and it will just negative numbers, and it'll just be call at that index of that negative number. All right. And if you start from a negative number, like it's if you only include two numbers in here, it will still count by default left to right. So if you include a number, if you include an index that comes before before in a string, then it would just print out nothing. So you just have to specify that you're counting backwards. All right, does that answer your question about negative numbers? All right. All right. Is there only predetermined numbers you can make the font? That is a good question, and it looks like it. I don't really explore much in idle. All right. And then moving on, so I said I'd mention lists. Lists, they pretty much allow you to store multiple values. They're separated by, they're created using square brackets as well, and you can store any values in them, separated by comma. So let's say I want to store VMCS, and then I want to store club, and then I want to store 1, 10, -2, 0.001. All right. And this is pretty much what a list is. All right. And even here, I can still, do the same thing about with the index operator. So let's say I want the very first item, I can still do that. If I want the last item, I can still do that. It gives me this in scientific notation. But let's say I want the second last item, it gives me that as well. All right. So that's pretty much what a list is. And then next thing we have this thing called a Boolean. So what a Boolean is, it's pretty much either true or false. That's it. There's no catch to it. It's just you can't have anything between true or false. It's literally just true or false. And that's what a Boolean is. So like true and then false. That's about it. You can write true or false directly into your code, or you can do something called a conditional statement. So these are made with the following characters, I guess. So there's equal to, which just it's a comparison. Not equal to, which is self-explanatory. Less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, is, and in. All right. So most of these should be self-explanatory. So not equal to is pretty self-explanatory. Less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Except for the differences between equal to and is. So those two are a bit separate, different, as well as in. All right. So the main difference between equal to and is that they're comparing two variables for an equality. All right. It might be a bit confusing for you guys. So I made an example here. So let's say I have a friend. We both go buy the same model of car. All right. Let's say we both buy a blue Honda Civic. All right. Now you might ask, are these the same car? So if we use the equals to, which is just the two equal signs, it only checks in terms of the properties. So let's say it's pretty much checking, are they the same model of car? Are they the same color of car? In which, yes, they're the same. If we use is instead, then it checks if they're the same object, like if they're exactly the same object, in which they're two separate cars. I own this car, this blue Honda Civic, and my friend owns this other blue Honda Civic. Are we driving the same Honda Civic? No. In which they're not. In which using is, it pretty much means these are not the same. All right. Anyone have any questions about that? About equality? All right, I'm guessing not. And then for the condition in, it should pretty much checks if an object is contained within a list, I guess. So let's say I have like this list up here with like Bob, Joe, Smith, 2, 2.5, and -1. I can check is Bob in this list, and it pretty much checks if it's in the list, or if 2 is in this list, or if 1 is in this list, and which 1 isn't in this list. All right. So here's some examples. So I can type just true, and false, in which that's just the simple Boolean true or false. And then I can check is 1 + 1 equal to 3, in which that's false. 1 + 1 isn't 3. What is 1 + 1 not equal to 3, in which it's true. But now is 1 + 1 equal to 2? Yes, 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. Now, is 1 plus 1 less than 2, though? It's false. But 1 plus 1, is it less than or equal to 2? That is true. Is 1 plus 4 greater than 4? It's true. 1 plus 2 is greater or equal to 4? That is false, because 1 plus 2 is 3, and 3 is clearly not greater or equal to 4. And then now let's check, are these two objects the same? So is Bob, does list Bob, is it also this other list Bob? No, these are two different objects. They're not the same. They have the same stuff, but they're not the same. Now is one? The one is one. They're the same. It's a bit more complicated to explain, but you can also use this type of quality for numbers, but not with lists. And now is Bob in this list Bob? That is true because that's contained within this list. All right, does anyone have any questions? Doesn't look like anyone has any questions so far. All right. Now you can also check if two or more conditions are both true or false. No, if two conditions are both true, you can use the keyword and, in which it's like in English, it's like, is this true and is this true? You know, you'd say one of them is not true, so they're false. One of them is false. But if you want to check if one of the conditions is true, you can use the keyword or, in which it will just ask, hey, is at least one of them true? It doesn't matter which one, is one of them true? So let's say it's true and true. They're both true. But if we have true and false, you know, one of them is false, so they're both, with the keyword and, it's false. Now, if we can do true or false, one of them is true, so it's true. All right. Now, does anyone have questions about that? Doesn't look like anyone has questions about that. All right, and next you can compare strings. So with strings, the comparison is a bit different. They're compared in lexicographical order. A bit of a mouthful and a bit confusing. So what lexicographical order is pretty much, it goes letter by letter. It compares the position of them on the alphabet. All right. So the reference they use to compare each, letter where they are in the alphabet, it doesn't use it gets really complicated once you start comparing between different between capital and lowercase. So what we use is this thing called ASCII values, and I linked an ASCII table which shows you all the values, and that shows you it shows you what the corresponding ASCII value is. You can also in Python just call ord and put in whatever value. So let's say I want to find the value of lowercase a, and it gives you like a number. All right. So all these letters have a corresponding number to it, and they compare each letter to see which one comes first in the alphabet, I guess. So we can check, is apple greater than apple? And that's false, because if we check the position of a, the uppercase a is 65, well, the position of lowercase a is 97. And now we're checking, is 65 greater than 97? Then that's false. All right. Now, if we check, is apple greater than apple? That is true, because this is 97. No, this is 65 and this is 97. So is 97 greater than 65? Yes, that is true. And then you can also do the double equal sign, in which is apple equal to apple, in which that's also true. All right. Now, before we'll get onto variables, does anyone have any questions about what I've taught you guys so far? No questions? All right. So with all these different types of data, you might be wondering, okay, all I'm doing is typing them out, but I'm not really storing them, and that's where we can use these things called variables. You can store whatever you want in variables, and you can always access them later by calling that variable. And you can name the variables whatever you want. However, there are some limitations to what you can name them. You can only include letters, numbers, or the character underscore. And you can't start with a number. But other than that, you can name them whatever you want. and then you assign values to them with the equal sign. So let's say we have this variable 1, and we name it, we have assign it the value 1, all right? We can always call variable 1 later, and that always has that value variable 1. Now, let's say I reassign it variable 1 to like 10.0, and then I call variable 1 again. Now it's comes 10.0, all right? And then you can always, call variable 1 and plus 2, and it adds 2 to it, and it still holds the same value as variable 1. All right, because I never reassigned it with the equal sign. All right. And then it also has the same properties with strings. So let's say string, and I call variable 1 at 1, and that gives me the first letter, which is the 1th letter, which is 2, I guess. And then it was also the same property with lists. So let's say we put string in here as well, and I call variable 1 at 0, and it does the same thing with lists. All right. So now we just covered most of the basic syntax. Anyone have questions about that? I guess not. Okay, I'm guessing no one has questions about that. What we can do now is we can start creating a Python file. So if you're using idle, you can go over to File, or if you're on a Mac, there should be the File bar on top, and then click File, and then click New File. All right. If you're on Replit, you already created a REPL, in which those, I guess, you should be easily able to. You already created a file. All right. Alternatively, if you're on idle, you can hit Control N, and that creates a new file. Or if you're on a Mac, Control is Command, so you can hit Command N on a Mac. Now, within these files, you can do whatever you mentioned previously. Oh, I forgot to also mention, files are stored as .py on your computer. So when you have a file, you just save it as a .py file, and it pretty much saves, I guess. Within these files, you can do whatever you mentioned earlier. However, you run the file, you won't see anything happen, I guess. So let's say we do 1 + 1, all right? And we save it. So we have to save the file, I guess. So let me just save it to my desktop. All right, and let's say we have name it test.py. All right, you can name it whatever you want, and then you click run. So you have to save it before you run on idle, and then you click run module here. If you run it like before, it doesn't do the 1 + 1 like we did before. This is because we have to within these files, you have to tell the computer to output whatever you want. And that's where this magical word called print comes in. All right. Now, we can use print to tell the computer what we want to output, and you can include anything in print. So you can include like text in here, you can include like numbers in here and things like that, and it'll print that. All right. So the most common thing with computer science, like what everyone prints, is hello world. There's a story behind it. I don't remember off the top of my head, but the first thing you should do is try print hello world. We save that, and then we run, and it prints hello world. Now, if we do 1 + 1 after that, and we run, it doesn't print 1 + 1 because we never, specified 1 + 1. However, print hello world works, and because that's the only thing we specified in print. All right. And if we do the same thing with if I print 1 + 1 though, so I can always add another print line, 1 + 1, and I print. It shows print. It shows hello world as well as the 2 from this other print as well. All right, and now we have output, but sometimes we want to tell the computer some information, and this is where input comes in. You can call input, and it will ask the user for its input, I guess. If you include text, like between the brackets with input, it will prompt the user with text, and it will and any input that you get from the user, it will default to making a string. So if you wanted to convert it to an integer or a float, you'll need to surround the input with int or float. And if you want to convert it any number back to a string, you can use the following str function. All right. So like, let's say we want to get someone's name. So let's say name input, and we put in a prompt saying, "What is your name?" All right. And then we print hello, hello name. All right. And then we save it and we run. So here it prompts us, "What is your name?" All right. And it says here, "What is your name?" So let's say I put in my name. So I put Gordon. All right. And it prints out hello Gordon. All right. And if we ask what is your age, so let's say we ask age, so int, so let's say we forget to put int, all right? We put input, what is your age? And then we print age plus 5, all right? And I run it. I put Gordon, and then what is my age? All right, let's say I put I'm, people thought I was 20. Let's say I put 20, all right? What do you guys think will happen if I put 20 here?
It'll say
It'll
25.
If I print it, it gives me an error because you can't add, this is a string because I didn't, specify that this is a number. The computer only knows that this is a string because by default it's a string. So you can't add strings and numbers together. It'll give you this error saying you can only concatenate strings with strings. And that's what's happening here is that it thinks that we're trying to do string concatenation. So it's doing a +5 to a string, but you can't. So what you have to do is instead you type int input around the input, and we run module again. So let's say what's my name? I put Gordon. And what's my age? Let's say I put 20 as well again. And now it gives me 25 because I converted the 20 into a number, and then we added 5 to it, and now prints 25. All right. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yep.
All right. And then, so if I want to, let's say I want to go back to, saying I want to say you will be, whatever, in 5 years. In 5 years. And then I run this again. So what is your name? So I put Gordon. And then what's my age? If I put 20, what do you think will happen here? What do you guys think will happen here if I hit enter right now with the 20?
It'll print like you will be 25 in 5 years.
If I hit enter, it gives me an error because we have to convert this back into a string in order to concatenate it within the string. All right. Does that make sense to you guys? You can't add strings with numbers. So you have to convert this number back into a string in order to add it into a string. All right. Does that make sense? I guess, does anyone have questions about this part, I guess? And I guess no one has questions about this. If for competitive programming contests, like in questions, please ensure you don't have anything in here. Like, do not have any prompts for competitive programming contests for content and questions, because when you have a prompt, it does the same. It pretty much does the same as print, and with competitive programming questions, they're really strict on what you can output and what is inputted. So if you don't have if you have a wrong output, it will just like say this is a wrong answer. So please make sure don't make this mistake and include a prompt here. Now, lastly, we will cover if statements and loops in Python. So if statements are conditional statements that will run a block of code, and only if and only if this condition that I put in this if statement is true. You can also do else if statements, in which it will run this if the previous statements of the if statements were false and this current condition is true, and an else statement which will only run if all the previous statements are false. That was a bit of a mouthful. I'll quickly explain to you guys. So let's say we have if this variable x, all right? And then we have to indent with your with if statements and these loops. So after your colon, what you have to do is you just pretty much in Python and idle it automatically indents and replit. But if you forget to indent, just hit tab if it doesn't indent properly. And here it pretty much this will only run if x is true. So we can say here x is true here. Now what if x is false? So you can pray and want to say we want to run something if x is false but y is true. You know, we can have an elif statement, but and say elif y. So this is pretty much saying if x is not true, continue on to this part and check if y is true now. Now if y is true, that means x had to be false and y is true. Now we can also put an else here, and that means if everything before that happened before was false, now run this now because everything else was false. Run this now because everything else was false, and so that means x and y are both false. All right. Now let's say we create like we have to create assign the variable. So let's say x is true and y is true. We run this, and now it only prints x is true because once it reaches x here, that means it just stops. It doesn't continue on. All right. But then we switch this to false. And I run this, and now it says x is false and y is true. Because x is false, it proceeds down the line and says, now check is y true, and now it prints x is false and y is true because y is true. Now if I set y to false and I run this, x and y are both false, and now this statement runs because it all else failed. All else failed. Does that make sense for you guys? Does anyone have any questions about that? I'm guessing no one has questions. All right. And then in terms of loops, there are two types of loops you'll use. So a while loop and a for loop. So a while loop is a conditional statement that will run a block of code while a condition is true. So an example would be, I didn't really format this documentation properly. So let's say while this item is true, okay? I print this will run while the condition is true. All right. Now I run this. Nothing is causing it to stop. So it just will run this forever and ever until I turn off my computer or I stop this program. So I can just stop this program, and it pretty much just keeps running. For those of you who ran this code, to stop this, you can just close the idle shell, or you can hit Control or Command C. Did someone have a question? Where do I click to run the file? To run the file, you hit the click Run on top, and you click Run Module. Or if you're on Replit, there should just be a massive Run button. All right. Or should we start? Does it say start? It should just be like this. It should also be a green button as well on the top. Are you on Replit or are you on idle? You're on idle. Okay. So what you want to do is, do you see run here on the top? Did you create a file? Did you create a file? Does it look like this, where it says shell debug options window? All right. I'm guessing you haven't created a file yet, so what you have to do is click File and then click New File, and then you'll see this Run button here once you create the file. All right. Does anyone have any questions? How do I make this will run while the condition is true stop? So you can open the shell and just hit Command C or Control C, and it'll just force this file to stop. If you're on Replit, there should be a stop button. All right, does it stop? All right. Okay. And another way you can work with this is like, let's say like we have like x equals 0, right? And then we just say, well, x is less than 10, all right? We can just add x on here. So let's say x equals x plus 1. You can do something like this with reassigning variables, and we just print out x, and it'll just keep running until while this condition is true, which is x is less than 10. So we run this, so it pretty much goes 0 all the way to 9 and just stops because what happens is, okay, so it first checks, is x less than 10? So at first it's initially x equals 0. If x 0 is less than 10, and it prints x, so it prints 0, and then it adds 1 to x, and which becomes 1. Then this whole thing restarts and says, now is 1 less than 10? Yes, it is. It prints 1, and adds 1 to that. Now it becomes x becomes 2. It goes up and checks, and so on and so forth, and until it reaches 9. Checks, is 9 less than 10? Yes, 9 is less than 10. It prints 9, and now it adds 1 to x, which becomes 10, and now it checks, is 10 less than 10? No, it's not, and it just exits out of here. All right. All right. I get unexpected EOFL parsing error. How do I fix this? So it looks like you have forgotten a colon at the end of your print statement. Can you do x plus equals 1 or x plus plus in Python? In Python, you cannot do x plus plus. However, you can do x plus equals 1. So one thing I forgot to mention with the operators is that you can, with your variables, you can do like x divided by equals 1, and this will just take the value divided by 1 and such. So let's say we do x divided by I shouldn't do it with 0. So let's do x divided by equals 2. All right, and we print x and we run. It runs x, and pretty much it takes x divided by 2, and assigns it to x. Or if I do x plus equals 2, it runs this. It becomes 12. If I do double divide, it does inner division, and run this. It does 5. And if I do x mod 2, it should give me 0 because the remainder of 10 divided by 2 is 0. So yeah, you can do x plus equals 1 in Python. So yeah, that's one thing with Python as well. I forgot to mention in my documentation, you can do you can assign your variables like this. So unsupported operand for minus age. So you're not converting your age back into an integer. So yeah, so as Jeffrey mentioned, you have to surround your input with int, and it will call it as an integer. All right. Does anyone have any more questions? So yeah, that's what an if statement was, and that was a while loop. Now a for loop, on the other hand, we were going back to earlier what we had. Let me just undo. With this plus equals 1 nonsense. All right. On the other hand, is a loop that lets you run through an element in a list. So you can just run through elements in a list, or you can go through a certain range of numbers. All right. So you can specify a variable that gets that becomes each element in this list that you run through, or you but typically what you'd use instead of like a list, specifying a list, is you just put a range of numbers. Typically from 0 to end. In order to do this, Python has a built-in function called range, where you can specify up to 3 numbers. So if you specify only one number, it creates a list starting from 0 up to, but not including the number you specified. And if you include 2 or 3 numbers, it acts similar to the index operator mentioned earlier. So it starts from the first number, up to but not including the second number, and the third number is that's what it's stepping by. All right. So rather than doing this, x equals 0, while x is less than 10, print x. What I can do instead is for I in range 10, and we can print I. All right. Now, if I run this, it prints every number starting from 0 up to but not including 10. All right. And if I do like 1, 10, it pretty much starts from 1 but goes up to not including 10. But if I specify a 2 here and I run it, it does it goes up by 2. All right. Does this make sense to you guys? And if so this is what like for I in range does, right? So it goes through every number in this range. Now I can also specify, instead of doing for I in range here, I can specify a list. So going back to the list, so let's say I put Bob, potato, NVIDIA, or what have you, and I save it, and now it goes through each item in this list, starting from the beginning to the end. All right, and I also specify a string as well, and it goes through each character of the string. So it goes through name, it goes through every letter, which is NAME, and prints it out. All right. Does that make sense to you guys with for loops? If someone has questions, we'll proceed on further. Now, within loops, you can use two special keywords, break and continue. So when break is called, it pretty much just stops the loop and just proceeds everything after the loop and just immediately gets out of this loop. So like, let's say we have like some operations here. So x equals 0, print something, all right? And when continue, so if I call a break in here, it pretty much just stops this loop and just goes straight forward. So let's say end of loop, all right? And if I run this, if I call break, it just immediately breaks out of this loop, all right? And it just already reaches the end of the loop. So these already happen because this happens before our break, but then once break is called, it pretty much just gets out of here. And but if I have continue instead, continue pretty much just goes to the next iteration of the loop. So if I have continue, this will not get run, but it'll just go back to the beginning and continue on. So if I have if I run this again, it will just continue. So it'll just reiterate. It'll go to the next iteration, which is just like A here, and then it'll go to M, continue, E, continue. All right. So let's go with the example I put in the documentation. So 0 to 4, and then if I check if I equals 2, it breaks out of this loop. Other than that, it prints I. All right. And if I run this, it goes 0, 1, and then once 2 hits, oh, that's the break is called, and that's the end of the loop. Power went out 1 sec. Me too. Don't worry, I will have this video of this meeting posted on YouTube. And if I'll be here after class if anyone has any questions about what they just missed. And then let's say instead of break, I put continue. All right, and I run this. It goes 0, 1, 3 because you know. Let's look through this loop. So it starts from 0. It checks if is I equal to 2. 0 is not equal to 2, so it just skips this if statement and goes straight to print, and it prints 0. Then it goes to 1. It iterates to the next part of the loop. Now is 1 equal to 2? That's clearly not true, so it just skips on and prints 1. Now it goes to 2. Now is 2 equal to 2? Yes, continue. It just goes to the next iteration of the loop. Now it's 3. Is 3 equal to 2? 3 is not equal to 2. It prints 3, and that's the end of the loop. All right. And the last thing I wanted to mention to you guys is comments. So comments are what Python essentially ignores. You can write whatever you want within these comments, and the computer just kind of ignores that it exists. It doesn't run it at all. And it's pretty helpful when you want to write something that you want to understand, or if you just need to remove a bit of buggy code without fully deleting it. You can write comments by using the multi-line string method I mentioned earlier, in which it writes multiple lines, or you can use the #hashtag symbol, and that will just create a single line of it creates a single single line comment. So let's say I want to just put a comment like this is a comment here. Python just ignores it and doesn't run it. It doesn't recognize it as an error. You can write whatever you want here. And if I run this, it runs perfectly fine. But if I write this as a comment outside of it, it gives me an error because this is not valid. It tries to run this as Python code. Now, if I want to do something multiple lines, I can also just use the multi-line string I mentioned earlier, and this will just also be ignored in Python. All right. So that's what pretty much comments are, and that's essentially that's all I want to teach you guys about basic syntax. This will get you the basics and get you started with Python. All right. Now, I have some DMod questions that I have that I want you guys to do on your own time. Please try them all out and do the best you can. So the very first one I want you to try is Hello World. It should be very simple for you guys. All it asks you to do is print Hello World. But it's very it teaches you about how strict competitive programming is. You have to follow the same capitalization and punctuation as competitive programming. Now, and then there's A plus B. It will get you basics. It'll teach you a bit about how input is taken, as well as how strict it is for prompting for input. And then here are a bunch of CCC questions that I want you guys to try. Feel free to try some of them out. Just at least do the first at least do the first 4 questions by next week. But I guess that's about it for my lesson. Does anyone have any more questions?
What's a Python?
Lily, shouldn't you be in senior class?
Shouldn't you answer my question?
Well, Python is a type of snake. The name behind Python is the language. It's not named after the snake itself. The real reason is that they named it after a show in UK. It's a comedy show. It's called Monty Python. If you guys are into that type of humor, I encourage you guys to watch it. I kind of enjoy that type of humor. But yeah, it's named after a show called Monty Python from the UK. Anyone else questions?
How do I get to CCO?
How do I get to CCO? Well, you get to CCO by practicing CCC. I totally didn't think Monty Python was the person. Uh, yeah, don't worry, Dorothy. Any other questions besides Lily's sarcastic questions?
Who said they were sarcastic?
Lily, shouldn't you be in senior class?
Is this not senior class?
This is junior.
Oh, my bad.
I'm allowed to do everything in one line. You can? I just would be disappointed. Well, I wouldn't be necessarily disappointed. I just it's not encouraged to do everything in one line. You want to make some stuff readable. You want to make your code readable for yourself mainly. So there's that. Yeah, it's starting to look real unreadable. Yeah, I've tried that before. It's not fun. It's not pleasant. Now, does anyone have any more questions before we go, or I stop recording this? I'm allowed to submit that though. Yes, you're allowed to submit. You're allowed to submit single line items, you know. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Anyone have any questions? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Doesn't look like anyone is typing in the chat as well. Okay, the meeting is over.